Imagine believing with like every fiber of your being that the man sitting under permanent house arrest in this totally claustrophobic military camp is actually the divinely appointed ruler of the universe.
Right, a guy who isn't even allowed to leave his courtyard.
Exactly. Imagine believing that this single human being, who literally can't even speak to his own followers, holds the cosmic secrets of heaven and earth.
It's such a staggering concept.
It really is. Today, we're exploring what I think is the ultimate paradox of power. We are looking at a historical landscape defined not by, armies marching and kings conquering, but by relentless marginalization and imprisonment and survival in the shadows.
Yeah, it completely flips the standard metric of historical success totally upside down. I mean, usually the victors write the history because they hold the pen and the sword, right?
Right.
But here, we're looking at a movement that forged its entire identity by being systematically excluded from the throne.
Well, welcome to today's deep dive. We have a massive, just fascinating mission ahead of us today. We are taking a really towering stack of dense historical texts, complex theological genealogies, and academic analyses.
Very dense stuff.
Oh, incredibly dense. And we're going to extract the epic, multi-generational saga of the Shi'i Imams. We're talking about the lives of the 12 Imams and the dizzying, almost chaotic array of sects that splintered off from their teachings over centuries of brutal persecution.
And it really is a saga in every sense of the word.
It is. And I want to speak directly to you, listening right now. If you've ever tried to read up on early Islamic history, you know it can feel like a hurricane of names, dates, and shifting alliances.
Oh, it is incredibly easy to get lost in the academic weeds.
Exactly. So our goal today is to cut through all of that noise. We want to reveal the human drama at the core, the high-stakes political chess matches, the tragic, world-altering sacrifices, the secret underground societies, and the evolution of a massive religious consciousness.
But before we unpack the timeline itself, we really need to set some very clear ground rules for how we are approaching this material.
Good point. Yeah, let's do that.
Because the sources you've provided for this deep dive contain deep-seated historical, religious, and political disputes. We are dealing with fundamental differing views between Sunni and Shi'i Muslims, as well as the intense friction between Western secular historians and traditional Shi'i scholars.
Right. And let me make this abundantly clear right up front. We are not taking sides today.
Not at all.
We are not endorsing any specific theological viewpoint, any particular sect, or any one historical interpretation over another. Our job is strictly and impartially to unpack the information contained in the source material.
We are just here to report on what the texts say, right?
Exactly. We explore the arguments they present and help you, the listener, understand the mechanics of this history. Nothing more.
Which brings us to the central question hovering over this entire narrative. As you read through these sources, one overarching theme just constantly emerges.
And what's that?
How does a movement survive, and not just survive, but eventually thrive and evolve into a major global faith, when its central figures, its chosen leaders, are continuously marginalized, imprisoned, poisoned, or assassinated?
Right. How do you keep the flame alive in a hurricane?
Exactly.
And the story begins with a figure whose life perfectly encapsulates that exact tension. We have to start with Ali, the first Imam in the Shi'i tradition and the fourth Caliph in broader Islamic history.
We do. But as we open the sources, we are immediately hit with two drastically different lenses through which to view him and his successors.
Yeah, the texts are very split on this.
They are. The sources explicitly tell us we must differentiate between traditional Shi'i history, which is largely apologetic, and seeks to prove the divine nature of the Imams and the findings of modern critical scholarship.
So the traditional writers sought to prove that the Imams were extraordinary, practically supernatural, from the very moment of their birth.
Yes, exactly.
So unpack that for me. What does that look like in the text? Like, what are they claiming?
Well, in the traditional quasi-legendary accounts, the texts claim that the births of the Imams were miraculous. They assert that the baby Imam was born already circumcised, with the umbilical cord cleanly severed by divine means.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and there are accounts claiming the infant Imam spoke immediately upon birth, sometimes even praising God from inside the womb before being born.
From inside the womb.
Literally from inside the womb. They detail that each Imam possessed supernatural omniscient knowledge, performed outright miracles, and was explicitly divinely designated by the preceding Imam before them.
So in that lens, they aren't just wise leaders, they are cosmic anchors.
Exactly, they're the center of the universe.
But the sources also point out that modern scholarship, and even some of the earliest, most rigorously critical Shi'i works, specifically refute these supernatural claims, right? They try to strip away the mythos to find the historical men.
They do, yeah. They try to get to the history.
So, setting the miracles aside, what is the hard historical reality of Ali's time and power? Because from what the texts show, it was anything but a divine breeze.
Oh, it was incredibly difficult. The historical reality of Ali's caliphate is that it was brief, lasting from roughly 656 to 661 AD, and it was violently turbulent.
Right, he comes in after a major assassination.
He does. After the assassination of the third caliph, Uthman, Ali's succession was actually approved by the vast majority of Muslims in Medina and most provinces of the empire. He was chosen by a genuine, widespread consensus.
People wanted him.
They were desperate for his legendary piety and leadership, but that initial euphoria wore off almost immediately.
Why is that?
Because he inherited an empire completely riddled with deep systemic corruption and internal fracture.
And reading through these accounts, it seems like his own personality, his defining character trait, was simultaneously his greatest asset and his absolute biggest political liability.
That is the tragedy of Ali's reign in a nutshell. He is universally regarded across all spectrums of Islam as a paragon of virtue.
Right.
He is a fount of knowledge, a man of staggering dimensions. His courage in battle during the Prophet's time was legendary.
He's also super intellectual, right?
Yeah.
The texts talk about his grammar.
Yes. He is considered the founder of Arabic grammar, a master of eloquence, and the source of the famous Naj al-Balagha, which is this vital collection of deeply philosophical sermons and letters.
But politically,
Politically, he was rigidly, inflexibly principled. He absolutely refused to compromise.
he wouldn't play the game. And to put this in context for you listening, imagine a newly elected president taking office after decades of rampant cronyism.
A great way to look at it.
Right, so half the government consists of the previous administration's wealthy, corrupt appointees. The politically savvy move is to slowly transition them out, make a few backdoor deals, keep the economy stable, and gently guide the ship.
Slowly boil the frog.
Exactly. But Ali walks in on day one and says, no, every single one of you is fired immediately.
That is exactly what happened. During the previous caliphate, many prominent people, especially from the powerful Umayyad family, had gained lucrative governorships and amassed immense wealth.
And Ali wasn't having it.
No, Ali looked at this and saw a grotesque deviation from the Prophet's original egalitarian intentions. So, ignoring the advice of his more politically pragmatic advisors, he immediately set about stripping these governors of their power.
Just firing everyone.
Firing everyone and redistributing the wealth, utterly regardless of the powerful, dangerous enemies he was making overnight.
Which leads directly to massive civil war. First, he faces the Battle of the Camel in 656 AD.
Yes. Prominent companions of the Prophet, men named Talha and Zubair, linked up with Aisha, the Prophet's widow, and raised a massive rebellion in Basra.
And Ali wins that one, right?
Ali managed to defeat them, but the psychological damage was done. Muslims were now shedding the blood of other Muslims on a massive scale.
Yeah, the seal's broken.
And waiting in the wings was the much larger existential threat, Muawiyah.
Muawiyah, he's the governor of Syria, and Umayyad, incredibly wealthy, commanding a highly disciplined army, and he flat out refuses to recognize Ali's authority.
He does not care about Ali's consensus.
Not at all. And this culminates in the Battle of Siffin in 657 AD. And the sources spent a lot of time on Siffin because it doesn't end in a glorious victory. It ends in one of the messiest, most consequential political stalemates in history.
The contrast between the two armies at Siffin is just striking. Ali's army was filled with veteran companions of the Prophet, deeply pious men, readers of the Quran who fought for theological righteousness.
Very ideological.
Right. Muawiyah's army, conversely, consisted mostly of Syrian Arab tribes bound by strict military discipline and the prospect of vast wealth and booty.
They're mercenaries, essentially.
Essentially, yes. As the battle raged and actually began to turn in Ali's favor, Muawiyah, who was a master of psychological warfare and intrigue, pulled a brilliant, desperate stunt.
This is the crazy part.
He ordered his soldiers to hoist pages of the Quran on the tips of their spears, crying out, "Let the book of God decide between us."
It's the ultimate trump card. I mean,
Yeah.
you can't attack the holy book, and this completely shatters the resolve of Ali's pious army.
Utterly shatters it. Ali saw right through the trick. He ordered his men to keep fighting, telling them it was a cynical ploy.
But they don't listen.
No, a massive faction of Ali's own army, specifically the contingents from Kufa, who were notoriously fickle, laid down their weapons and threatened to kill Ali if he didn't agree to stop the fighting and submit to arbitration.
Wow. They essentially held their own commander hostage.
They did.
So Ali is forced, at sword point by his own troops, to accept arbitration. He doesn't even get to pick his own representative.
Right, they forced that on him too.
And then, in a twist of truly perverse, tragic irony, after the arbitration goes poorly, a faction of his own army turns around and blames Ali for the very thing they forced him to do.
It is mind-boggling, but human psychology often is.
Yeah.
This faction becomes known as the Kharijites, or the Seceders.
That's the seceders.
Yeah. They separated from Ali's camp, chanting the slogan, "Judgment is God's alone." They twisted themselves into a theological knot, deciding that by submitting to human arbitration instead of fighting to the death, Ali had committed a grave, unforgivable sin.
Even though they literally forced him to do it.
Exactly. But they declared him an infidel anyway. They became a terrifying, violent sect, committing atrocities and terrorizing the countryside near Ali's capital in Kufa.
Ali eventually has to march out and defeat them at the Battle of Nahrawan, but the ideological infection is out there. The damage is permanent.
It's totally permanent.
And in the end, it isn't Muawiyah's massive Syrian army that brings Ali down. In 661 AD, while praying in the mosque in Kufa, Ali is struck in the head with a poisoned sword by Abdurrahman ibn Muljam.
A disgruntled Kharijite.
Right. A man who used to be on his own side.
Ali dies 2 days later, and his sudden death leaves a chaotic, terrifying vacuum. The army in Kufa, which had already proven itself to be disunited, exhausted, and incredibly unreliable, hastily pledges allegiance to Ali's eldest son, Hassan, making him the second Imam.
Hassan steps into a nightmare scenario. He's in his late 30s. He has immense spiritual prestige. He's known as Al-Mujtaba, the chosen one.
Yes, very prestigious.
The sources note the prophet had deep, visible affection for Hassan and his younger brother Husayn, famously calling them the chiefs of the youths of paradise. But as Hassan quickly finds out, divine prestige does not pay soldiers.
No, it doesn't.
And it certainly does not stop Syrian cavalry.
The brutal military reality on the ground was completely against him. Hassan is facing the advancing Syrian army led by Muawiyah. And Muawiyah doesn't just rely on overwhelming military force. He utilizes a highly sophisticated intelligence network.
He fights dirty.
Very dirty. He sends secret agents directly into Kufa. He spreads malicious, false rumors to sow panic. He reaches out to Hassan's top military commanders and offers them staggering bribes, bags of gold, promises of lucrative governorships.
And it works.
His tactics work flawlessly.
Hassan literally watches his military apparatus disintegrate from the inside.
He does. Before a major battle is even fought, part of his army rebels against him. Another massive chunk simply deserts and goes over to the Syrians. And in the chaos, Hassan's own tent is plundered by his own mutinous soldiers. He is physically attacked and wounded in the thigh.
By his own men.
Yes. He retreats to a nearby town, looking at the remnants of a shattered, untrustworthy force, while Muawiyah's disciplined legions close in.
So Hassan makes a decision that has sparked fierce, polarizing historical debate for over a millennium. He abdicates.
He does.
He formally steps down, hands the caliphate entirely over to Muawiyah, and retires to Medina to live a quiet life.
Yeah.
And the sources here show a massive, fascinating divergence in how this act is interpreted.
Oh, absolutely. Of all the 12 Imams, Hassan is the one who has faced the harshest, most dismissive criticism from Western secular historians.
Really? How do they frame it?
The texts note that Western scholars have historically derided him for giving up without a fight. They describe him in incredibly unflattering terms: unintelligent, politically incapable, and a lover of luxury. Yeah. The specific term used in some older texts is uxorious, meaning he was excessively submissive to or fond of his wives, preferring the comforts of the harem to the rigors of the battlefield.
But the Shi'i historians absolutely reject that framework.
Vehemently. Traditional Shiite historians and modern sympathetic scholars push back with immense force. They argue that this Western narrative completely misreads the situation.
How do they see it?
They point out that Hassan's abdication was not an act of feeble cowardice or a desire for luxury. It was a deeply realistic, hyper-pragmatic, and a profoundly compassionate act.
Because his army was gone.
Right. Given the total betrayal of his army and the havoc Muawiyah had already wreaked, fighting would have only resulted in the absolute slaughter of his few remaining loyal followers. Abdication was the only logical course to avoid pointless, massive bloodshed.
I think we need a modern analogy here to help visualize the mechanics of this decision.
Let's hear it.
Think of Hassan's situation like a massive, hostile corporate takeover. Hassan is the CEO of a company that is hemorrhaging cash. He just found out that half his board of directors has been bribed by the rival firm, And his own IT department is actively sabotaging the servers.
That's a great comparison.
Right. So he realizes that if he drags this out in a drawn-out, bitter court battle, the company will go completely bankrupt, the stock will hit zero, and every single rank-and-file employee will lose their pension and their livelihood.
Everyone loses everything.
Exactly. So he makes the agonizing choice to step down. He accepts a generous severance package, which Muawiyah actually offered him strictly to save the employees from mass layoffs and total destruction.
That analogy holds up so well to the historical correspondence between the two men. In their letters, Muawiyah essentially strips away the theology and speaks pure, real politics.
Just raw power dynamics.
Exactly. He tells Hasan, I have overwhelming military strength, supreme political ability, and age on my side. In the realm of governing an empire, those practical assets matter more than your religious precedents or bloodline.
He's basically saying, I'm just stronger than you.
Exactly. But Muawiyah desperately needed Hasan to formally abdicate because it was the only way to lend legal legitimacy to his military power grab. So Muawiyah offered incredibly generous terms.
Like what?
A general amnesty for all of Hasan's followers, ensuring they wouldn't be hunted down. A massive financial settlement to clear Hasan's debts and provide for his household. And, crucially, an alleged condition that the caliphate would automatically revert back to Hasan upon Muawiyah's death.
But wait, let's look at this from the perspective of the followers. In a 7th century Arabian culture that deeply, deeply values honor, lineage, divine right, and dying for a cause, wasn't this abdication viewed as a massive, humiliating PR disaster?
Oh, without a doubt.
Even if it logically saved lives. I mean, I'm a loyal soldier in Kufa. I've lost friends fighting for Ali, and now Ali's son just signs a piece of paper and hands the empire to the man who killed him. I'd be furious.
And many were. It was an incredibly painful, bitter pill for his supporters to swallow. Some of his most ardent, fiery followers felt profoundly let down, even betrayed.
Did they push back?
They did. They confronted him, begging him to reconsider. But Hasan held firm. He absorbed their anger because he knew the geopolitical reality better than they did.
He took the hit.
He took the hit. Even years later, when delegations would secretly come to him in Medina, offering him armies if he would just give the word to rise up, he flatly refused. He honored the treaty.
Because he knew he couldn't win.
He knew Muawiyah's grip on the empire was unbreakable. And tragically, despite all his pragmatism and desire for peace, the sources state that Hasan did not die a natural death.
Right.
At the age of 46, he was poisoned by his own wife, allegedly at the secret instigation of Muawiyah, who wanted to clear the board entirely to ensure the controversial succession of his own son, Yazid.
So Hasan looked at the board, saw he was in checkmate, and chose to lay down his king to save the pawns. He was the ultimate pragmatist.
The perfect way to summarize it.
But when he dies, the Imamate passes to his younger brother, Husayn, the third Imam. And Husayn is about to face a new caliph, a totally different set of political circumstances, and he is going to make a drastically different, world-altering choice.
This brings us to the defining, earth-shattering tragedy of Shi'i history. Karbala. Husayn, the third Imam, who will become known universally as the Prince of Martyrs, succeeds his brother.
The Prince of Martyrs.
Yes. Now, it's important to note that while Muawiyah was still alive, Husayn maintained his brother's policy. He remained quiet in Medina, honoring the treaty.
He didn't rock the boat.
He didn't. But the geopolitical earthquake happens in 680 AD. Muawiyah dies, and his son, Yazid, assumes the caliphate.
And from everything the texts say, Yazid is the absolute antithesis of what a pious Muslim expects in a leader. He is completely unacceptable to Husayn.
The sources paint a stark, incredibly negative portrait of Yazid. He is described not as a pious statesman, but as a frivolous, secular king.
What was he doing that was so bad?
The texts depict him as an open drunkard, a man who hunted with cheetahs, dressed as pet monkeys in silk, and brazenly flouted the foundational laws of Islam in public.
Dressed as monkeys in silk. That's quite an image.
It's meant to show total decadence. For deeply pious Muslims, and especially for the grandson of the Prophet, Yazid's accession wasn't just bad politics, it was a religious outrage. Husayn absolutely, unequivocally refuses to pledge allegiance to Yazid.
He draws a line in the sand.
He does. He knows the assassins will come for him in Medina, so he packs up his family and moves to the sanctuary city of Mecca to avoid the immense pressure.
And meanwhile, over in Kufa, the people are getting restless again. They hear Muawiyah is dead, they hate Yazid, and they know Husayn has refused allegiance. So they start sending letters.
Thousands of letters.
Not just a few, yeah. Sacks full of pledges of support, begging Husayn to come to Iraq and lead a massive revolt. Husayn is cautious, so he sends his trusted cousin, Muslim ibn Aqil, to go to Kufa and verify if the support is real.
And at first, the intelligence is incredibly positive. Muslim ibn Aqil arrives in Kufa and is greeted as a hero. Tens of thousands of men secretly swear allegiance to him on Husayn's behalf.
So it looks like a sure thing.
It really does. Muslim sends a letter back to Mecca saying, "The people are with us, come immediately." Based on this definitive intelligence, Husayn makes the fateful decision to leave Mecca and press on toward Kufa.
But he doesn't bring an army, does he?
No, crucially he doesn't. He takes only about 50 to 70 armed men, his closest family members, and a large number of women and children.
But the political tide in Kufa turns with terrifying speed. Yazid is no fool. He has his father's geopolitical instincts. He knows exactly what is brewing in Iraq.
Yazid reacts swiftly and ruthlessly. He dismisses the weak governor of Kufa and dispatches Ubaydullah ibn Ziyad, a man known for his extreme energy and sheer brutality.
And Ubaydullah just locks it down.
Completely. Ubaydullah rides into Kufa disguised as Husayn to gauge the crowd, then immediately takes over the governor's palace and institutes a reign of absolute terror. He locks down the city. He summons the tribal leaders and tells them in no uncertain terms, "If any man in your tribe rebels, I will execute you and wipe out your entire family."
Just pure terror tactics.
Exactly. He systematically hunts down Husayn's emissary, Muslim ibn Aqil, tortures him, and publicly executes him, throwing his headless body from the roof of the palace.
Horrifying.
And the Kufans, utterly paralyzed by the terror of Ubaidullah's sword, entirely forget their thousands of pledges to Husayn. They melt back into their homes.
And the tragic part is, Husayn is already on the road. He actually receives desperate warnings about this total collapse while he's traveling through the desert.
He gets warnings, yes.
Travelers coming from Iraq tell him, the hearts of the people are with you, but their swords are drawn against you. Don't go to Iraq, turn back to Yemen, go anywhere else. But he presses forward.
He presses on. And inevitably, his tiny, vulnerable band is intercepted by a vanguard of the Umayyad cavalry, led by a young commander named Al-Hur.
Does Husayn try to reason with him?
He does. Husayn literally brings out the sackfuls of letters, showing Al-Hur the physical evidence of the Kufans' invitations. But Al-Hur's orders are strict. He tells Husayn, "I did not write those letters, and I cannot let you return to Medina."
So they're trapped.
They are forced into a tense, moving standoff, traveling under military escort until they are pushed into a desolate, sun-baked plain called Karbala, arriving on the 2nd of the month of Muharram.
And then the army shows up.
By the next day, the horizon darkens with troops. 4,000 heavily armed soldiers under the command of Umar ibn Saad surround Husayn's camp of 70 men and their families.
And this is where the sheer brutality of the state apparatus really tightens the vice. The Umayyad army makes a move that is considered a massive violation of basic human decency in desert warfare.
They cut them off from the water.
They cut Husayn's camp off in the Euphrates River. They have absolutely no water in the searing, blistering heat of the Iraqi desert.
It was a deliberate, agonizing tactic to force total surrender. Husayn attempts to negotiate. He rides out and asks to simply be allowed to withdraw, to return to Arabia and live in peace to avoid shedding the blood of Muslims.
He's offering them a peaceful out.
He is. But Umar ibn Saad is under strict, draconian orders from the governor, Ubaydullah. Ubaydullah demands complete, unconditional submission. Husayn must bow to Yazid or he must die.
And Husayn will never bow.
Never. Finally, on the evening of the 9th of Muharram, a vicious commander named Shimir arrives with the final, irrevocable orders to attack. Knowing the end is near, Husayn gathers his small band of followers that night.
This is such a heavy moment in the sources.
It's incredibly emotional. He extinguishes the lamps in his tent so no one has to feel ashamed, and he tells them, "They only want me. I release you from your oath of allegiance. Take my family, use the cover of darkness, and flee into the desert. Save your lives."
But they refuse. Every single one of them refuses to desert him.
They refuse. They tell him they will die before they let a single hair on his head be harmed. And so dawns the 10th of Muharram, the day of Ashura, a day that permanently scars the timeline of Islam.
72 against 4,000.
Yes. Husayn's companions number only 72 armed men. The battle is a drawn-out, agonizing process of sporadic single combat and relentless, steady arrow fire. From morning until mid-afternoon, one by one, Husayn's loyal supporters ride out, fight with desperate courage, and are cut down.
The sources describe the horrific cinematic details of this massacre. And it wasn't just a military defeat, it was the systematic, intimate annihilation of the Prophet's own flesh and blood.
The specific details are deeply searing and vital to understanding the emotional core of Shi'ism. Husayn's immensely brave half-brother, Abbas, acts as the standard-bearer.
She tries to get water, right?
Yes. Hearing the agonizing cries of the children dying of thirst, Abbas mounts his horse, takes a water skin, and actually manages to smash his way through the enemy lines to the river. But on his way back, he is ambushed, his arms are severed, and he is killed before he can bring a single drop of water to the tents.
It's so terrific.
At another point, Husayn sits in front of his tent holding his 6-month-old infant son, desperately pleading with the enemy for just a cup of water for the baby. In response, an Umayyad archer fires a heavy arrow that strikes the infant directly in the throat, pinning the baby's neck to Husayn's arm.
Oh my gosh.
Finally, left entirely alone, parched with thirst, and bearing more than 30 ghastly wounds from swords, spears, and arrows, Husayn himself is struck down. Shamir, the ruthless commander, dismounts and personally decapitates the grandson of the Prophet.
And the cruelty doesn't stop when the battle ends. The aftermath is designed for maximum psychological humiliation. They burn and loot the tents, stripping the women of their veils. They sever the heads of all the martyrs, mount them on tall spears, and force the surviving women and children,
Including his sister.
including Husayn's fiercely strong sister Zainab and his only surviving son Ali, who was shivering with a severe fever and too sick to fight to march in chains as captives alongside the severed heads of their loved ones.
All the way to Kufa and eventually to the Caliph's court in Damascus.
And it is in Kufa that we witness an incredible, spine-tingling moment of defiance. The captives are brought before the tyrant governor, Ubaydullah. The severed head of Husayn is placed in a basin before him, and Ubaydullah mockingly strikes Husayn's lips with his cane.
Such a desecration.
An elderly bystander, a companion of the Prophet, cries out in absolute horror, "Remove your cane! For by God, many a time have I seen the lips of the Prophet of God kissing those very lips." And Zainab, exhausted, grieving, and in chains, stands before the governor with staggering, terrifying dignity. She delivers a blistering, fearless speech, utterly humiliating Ubaydullah in his own court. When he threatens to execute her sick nephew, Ali, Zainab throws herself over him and demands to be killed first. She refuses to be broken.
It is an unimaginably dark, heavy moment in history. But here's where we have to pause and ask the most crucial question of all. The why.
Right. Why did he do it?
Why did Husayn continue? When he got the news on the road that Kufa had betrayed him, why didn't he turn his caravan around? Some secular historians look at this and just dismiss it as pure political adventuring, a terrible, stubborn miscalculation by a man who overestimated his own popularity.
But modern critical Shi'is historians, most notably S.H.M. Joffrey, argue something entirely different, and it is a fascinating sociological theory.
It really is. Joffrey argues that this wasn't a miscalculation at all. Husayn was not naive. He was fully, acutely aware of the military dangers. He knew that taking 72 men against the Umayyad Empire was military suicide.
He knew he couldn't win.
Right. If he wanted to start a real war, he would have stayed in the Hijaz and mobilized the mountain tribes. He didn't even try.
Okay, stop right there. If you know unequivocally that you are walking your family into a literal slaughterhouse, what on earth are you trying to achieve?
Joffrey theorizes that Husayn was planning something far deeper than a coup. He was orchestrating a complete revolution in the religious consciousness of the Muslims.
A revolution in consciousness.
Yes. Husayn understood a fundamental law of history. A victory achieved purely through military might is always temporal. If you win with the sword, another man with a bigger sword will eventually bring you down.
That's true.
But a victory achieved through profound, unmerited suffering, through a willing, agonizing sacrifice for a principle, that bypasses the battlefield entirely. It bypasses the intellect. It burns itself permanently into human consciousness.
So you're saying this is essentially a calculated, highly orchestrated martyrdom designed to jolt a sleeping system.
Exactly.
Like, think of it this way. Imagine a whistleblower working deep inside a corrupt, totalitarian regime. They uncover evidence of horrifying systemic corruption at the very top. Now, they know that if they release the documents, they will be arrested immediately.
Oh, yeah, they're done for.
They will be tortured.
Yeah.
Their reputation will be destroyed. They might even be executed in a show trial. But they willingly leak the documents and wait for the police to arrive. knowing that the ensuing public spectacle, the sheer, undeniable injustice of their suffering on the public stage, will expose the regime's rotten core.
That is a phenomenal parallel.
They willingly lose the battle for their own physical freedom, precisely because it is the only way to win the war for the moral soul of the society.
Husayn's strategy was to violently awaken the dormant Muslim consciousness. Yazid's secular kingship was smothering the moral core of Islam. To Husayn, simply raising another army wouldn't shake up the hearts of the people. It would just be another political squabble over land.
It needed to be shocking.
It required a massive, shocking, undeniable moral earthquake. And taking his women and children with him was not a mistake. It was the final, brilliant piece of that strategy.
Because they become the messengers.
Exactly. He knew the Umayyads were brutal enough to take them captive and parade them across the empire. That caravan of weeping captives, the Prophet's own immediate family in heavy chains, acted as a mobile broadcasting system.
They kept the story alive.
They publicized Husayn's message, told the story of the massacre in every village they passed, and forced the entire Muslim world to sit with the horrific reality of what their leaders had done. As Joffrey notes, Husayn succeeded brilliantly in his true purpose.
It changed the religion entirely.
The martyrdom of Husayn gave Shi'i Islam an entire ethos of sanctification through martyrdom. It fundamentally altered the DNA of the religion. To this very day, over 1,000 years later, the first 10 days of Muharram plunged the global Shi'i community into intense, weeping, chest-beating mourning.
So the shockwave of Karbala ripples outward. It is a paradigm shift. But practically, for the surviving lineage of the Imams, it proves definitively that direct military confrontation against the state is absolute suicide.
The sword is off the table.
The board has been wiped clean. The survivors have to completely radically rethink what it means to lead a religious movement. Which brings us to the aftermath and the leadership of the fourth Imam.
After the dust settles at Karbala, the heavy mantle of leadership falls to the fourth Imam, Ali Zayn al-Abidin. As we noted, he was the only adult male of Husayn's line to survive the massacre, entirely because he was incapacitated with a severe fever and couldn't lift a sword.
How does a man operate in the shadow of that kind of all-encompassing trauma? I mean, he watched his father, his uncles, his brothers, and his infant nephew get butchered in front of him.
He responds with complete, absolute withdrawal. He lives a deeply secluded, intensely spiritual life in Medina. He severs himself entirely from any political ambition or revolutionary rhetoric.
He just prays.
He becomes famous for his overwhelming, almost intimidating piety. His title, as Sajjad, literally means the prostrator, because the sources say he prayed so constantly and intensely that he developed thick calluses on his forehead that regularly had to be shaved down.
That's intense.
But the defining feature of his life is grief. He is recorded as spending decades simply weeping over the martyrs of Karbala. Whenever a servant poured him a glass of water, he would look at it, remember his father's thirst, and weep until his tears mixed with the water.
But here's the fascinating dynamic. The Imam himself embraces utter quietism, but the rest of the community, they do the exact opposite. The trauma of Karbala acts like a match thrown into a powder keg of guilt.
Precisely. In Kufa, the very men who had written letters to Husayn and then cowardly stayed in their homes while he was slaughtered suddenly woke up to the agonizing reality of their betrayal. The guilt was suffocating.
So they formed a group.
A massive group of them formed an organization calling themselves the Tawabern, which translates to the penitents. And their goal was fascinating. They didn't really care about political victory. They wanted atonement through death.
Wow.
About 3,000 of them marched openly against a massive, heavily armed Umayyad army, actively seeking to die on the battlefield to wash away the sin of abandoning the grandson of the Prophet. They were, predictably, virtually annihilated.
It's a literal mass suicide mission driven entirely by historical guilt.
Yes, but then comes a much more strategically astute figure named Mukhtar. Mukhtar leads a highly successful, though temporary, armed uprising in Kufa. And Mukhtar does two incredibly revolutionary things that permanently alter the trajectory of the movement.
What's the first one?
First, he recognizes an untapped political resource. He mobilizes the Mawali.
Okay, explain who the Mawali are, because this is crucial for the sociological shift in Islam.
The Mawali were non-Arab converts to Islam, predominantly Persians, Iranians. Under the Umayyad system, despite being Muslims, They were treated as second-class citizens by the dominant Arab elite.
They were marginalized.
They paid heavier taxes and were treated with contempt. Mukhtar promised them absolute equality, and suddenly the movement wasn't just an Arab tribal dispute. It had massive, diverse, grassroots demographic power.
And a second thing.
Second, because the actual fourth Imam, Zayn al-Abidin, is sitting in Medina completely ignoring the rebellion, Mukhtar needs a figurehead. So he spreads propaganda for a different, surviving son of Ali, a man named Muhammad ibn al-Hanafiya.
Unless he just picked someone else.
He proclaims this man is the true Imam, and crucially, he calls him the Mahdi, the divinely guided savior who would deliver the oppressed from tyranny.
Wait, this is huge. This is the first time we see the concept of the Mahdi weaponized politically, right? The idea of a messianic savior figure.
Exactly. And when this figurehead, Ibn al-Hanafiya, eventually dies a normal death, some of his radicalized followers simply refuse to accept it.
They think he's still alive.
They claim, no, he didn't die. He has merely gone into concealment, into occultation, hidden in a mountain gorge guarded by lions, and he will return at the end of time. So these explosive theological ideas that Mahdi, concealment, return are now bubbling furiously in the collective unconscious of the sects.
But again, the fourth Imam, Zayn al-Abidin, ignores all of this noise. He finishes his life in quiet prayer and mourning. When he passes, the 12er Imamate transfers to his son, Muhammad al-Baqir, the fifth Imam.
Yes.
And al-Baqir looks at the bloody, chaotic landscape and decides to continue his father's strict policy of absolute political quietism.
Yes, al-Baqir, whose title translates to the splitter open of knowledge, focuses entirely on teaching and legal scholarship. He categorically refuses to put forward any political claim or endorse any armed rebellion.
But not everyone in his family agrees with that.
No, this rigid quietism finally causes a massive structural fracture within his own immediate family. His half-brother, Zayd, looks at al-Baqir's scholarly retreat and vehemently, furiously disagrees with the entire approach.
Zayd is looking at the oppression of the Umayyads and thinking, what good is our theology if we don't fight for the people?
Exactly. Zayd argues that an imam cannot be a passive scholar sitting on a prayer mat. He believes an imam must draw the sword. He advocates for an aggressive, politically and militarily active role.
And he's willing to make deals to do it.
Very pragmatic deals. He realizes that to overthrow the Umayyads, he needs a massive coalition, which means he needs the support of moderate Sunnis. So Zayd makes a huge theological compromise.
What does he do?
He publicly accepts the legitimacy of the caliphates of Abu Bakr and Umar, the first two caliphs, whom traditional Shia rejected strictly out of political expediency to win over the masses.
Let's highlight this contrast because it's brilliant. You have two brothers navigating survival in totally different ways. Zayd is compromising on pure theology to build a massive, inclusive military coalition. He wants to win the state.
Right.
Meanwhile, al-Baqir is preserving the absolute purity of the theology, but at the cost of entirely surrendering the political realm.
It's the classic divide between the activist and the scholar. Zayd eventually launches his rebellion in Kufa, and tragically but predictably he is killed, and his body is brutally crucified.
But his followers keep going.
His ideological descendants become the Zaydiya sect. They survive to this day, predominantly in modern Yemen. Their theology dictates that the Imamate belongs to any qualified descendant of Ali and Fatima who has the courage to come forward openly, draw the sword, and claim leadership through action. They reject the concept of hidden, quiet imams.
Meanwhile, back on the main 12er line, al-Baqir continues his quiet scholarship and eventually passes the leadership to his son, Jafar as-Sadiq, the sixth Imam. And this is where the story hits an intellectual renaissance.
It really does.
Jafar is an absolute titan of Islamic history. He lives right through the chaotic, incredibly violent transition period where the Umayyad dynasty finally rots from the inside and is overthrown by the rising Abbasid dynasty.
Jafar as-Sadiq achieves staggering renown across the entire Muslim world. His reputation for piety, profound philosophical insight, and legal brilliance is just unmatched.
Even outside of Shi'is, right?
To give you a sense of his gravity, even the foundational figures of Sunni Islam, men like Abu Hanifa and Malik ibn Anas, who founded the major Sunni schools of jurisprudence, studied with him, respected him immensely, and transmitted traditions from him. He was a universal intellectual hub.
But here's what I don't get. During this massive, bloody political upheaval, when the Umayyads are collapsing and the Abbasids are clawing their way to power, doesn't anyone look at Jafar with all his prestige and ask him to take the throne?
They absolutely do. The political leaders of the Abbasid revolt, who were actually using pro-Alid, pro-Shi propaganda to rally the masses to their cause, at one point sent a secret letter to Jafar explicitly offering him the caliphate.
They offered him the empire.
They essentially said, the empire is yours if you want it. But Jafar, deeply aware of the treacherous, cyclical nature of political power, took the letter, held it over a flame, burned it to ashes, and declined. He maintained the strict family policy of quietism.
And instead of building an army, which he easily could have done, Jafar spends his life building an impenetrable theological fortress. He formalizes concepts that literally ensure the psychological and organizational survival of the Shia community for the next 1,000 years.
This is his true genius. Modern historians suggest that under Jafar as-Sadiq, the somewhat nebulous beliefs of early Shi'ism were synthesized into a rigorous, cohesive theological architecture. He formalized three crucial doctrines.
Let's go through them. The first is Nas.
Nas being the explicit formal designation of the next Imam. Nas dictates that the Imamate doesn't just go to the strongest son, or the oldest, or the one who draws a sword. It is transferred only through an explicit divine designation by the preceding Imam.
Why was that so important?
This was an absolutely essential organizational tool because with dozens of charismatic descendants of Ali running around launching rebellions and claiming leadership, Nas clearly legally distinguished the legitimate, quietist 12er line from the chaotic rival claimants. It brought order to the succession.
It's like ensuring the CEO leaves a legally airtight, undeniable will and testament so the board can't fracture the company when he dies.
Precisely. The second doctrine he formalized is Ilm. This is the profound idea that the Imam possesses a special, exclusive, divinely inspired knowledge.
It's not just book smarts.
No, it's not just that he is well-read, it's that he has an inherited, esoteric understanding of religion, sometimes even stretching into knowledge of the unseen. This doctrine was vital because it justified why the Imam is the absolute infallible authority on law and spiritual practice.
So they don't need the state scholars.
Exactly. It made the Shia community intellectually independent. They didn't need the Sunni state scholars because they had a walking, breathing conduit to divine truth.
But the third doctrine, this is the one that fascinates me the most. Taqiyya, religious dissimulation.
Taqiyya is the legally and spiritually permissible concealing of one's true faith to avoid severe persecution or death. It became a vital everyday survival mechanism.
Because the Abbasids turn on them, right?
Yes. As the new Abbasid caliphs consolidated power, they quickly turned on their former Shia allies, launching brutally repressive, deadly campaigns to root out Alid supporters. Jafar told his followers, essentially, your blood is more sacred than a public proclamation. Hide your allegiance to survive.
Okay, we have to unpack this because this isn't just a historical footnote. This fundamentally rewires the psychology of a society. We briefly mentioned it earlier as a kind of spiritual witness protection program, but it's so much heavier than that.
It really is.
In witness protection, you move to a new town and start fresh. With Taqiyya, you stay in your house. You go to the public mosque with your neighbors. You pray the way the state demands you pray. You might even have to nod your head when the local governor stands at the pulpit and curses your beloved Imam. You are actively lying to the world every single day to protect your life. How does that warp or strengthen a religious community?
It creates a profound, agonizing duality of existence. On one hand, the psychological toll is immense. You are living in a constant state of hypervigilance, terrified that a slipped word will get your family executed. You are deprived of the basic human need for authentic public expression.
But there's an upside.
On the other hand, it forces the religion to internalize deeply. Faith is no longer about public performative rituals. It becomes a fiercely guarded inner truth. It creates an incredibly tight-knit, invisible brotherhood among the believers.
Because you share a secret?
You share a dangerous secret, and that shared secrecy binds the community together far stronger than public freedom ever could. The inner world, the batin, becomes sacred, while the outer world, the zahir, is viewed as corrupt and dangerous.
And as we will see, that culture of intense secrecy, of hidden truths and double lives, is going to act like a theological pressure cooker, mutating into some wild consequences down the line. Because this intellectual golden age under Jafar couldn't last forever.
No, it couldn't.
The Abbasids, the new rulers of the empire, eventually realized that these quiet, scholarly imams sitting passively in Medina are actually their biggest existential threat.
The Abbasids had a legitimacy problem. They claimed the right to rule because they were descended from the Prophet's uncle, Abbas. But deep down, they knew, and the public knew, that the direct descendants of the Prophet through his daughter Fatima the Alids, the Imams, had a vastly stronger biological and spiritual claim to the hearts of the people.
People still love the Imams more.
The Abbasids realized that a quiet imam with massive moral authority is far more dangerous than an armed rebel with none. And so the era of relative intellectual freedom brutally closes, and the era of the Imams as tightly controlled political pawns begins.
And right away, the transition of power from the sixth Imam, Jafar as-Sadiq, to the seventh Imam is incredibly messy and confusing, even with the doctrine of Nas in place.
It was a succession crisis that permanently splintered the movement. Jafar's eldest son, a man named Ismail, was widely expected to succeed him, but in a shocking turn of events, Ismail died prematurely while his father, Jafar, was still alive.
So what happens when Jafar dies?
When Jafar eventually died, the community was thrown into massive confusion. Who is the Imam now? Some hardliners claimed the designation couldn't be changed, so the Imamate must have automatically transferred to Ismail's young son.
It gets complicated fast.
Another massive faction threw their support behind Abdullah al-Afta, Jafar's oldest surviving son. But Abdullah died just a few months later. Finally, after immense turmoil, the main body of what would become Twelver Shi'ism coalesced around a younger son, Musa al-Kazim, recognizing him as the seventh Imam.
But the faction that believed the line went through the deceased Ismail, and they never come back to the fold, do they? They split off permanently.
They do. They become known as the Ismailis. And because they split off right here at the height of this esoteric, secretive intellectual period, they will go on to do some of the most radical, politically explosive things in all of Islamic history.
We'll definitely circle back.
Oh, we will circle back to their wild trajectory in a moment. For now, the main Twelver line continues with Musa al-Kazim, the seventh Imam, and his life is essentially a nightmare of relentless Abbasid harassment.
He has the misfortune of dealing with the famous Abbasid Caliph Harun al-Rashid.
Yes, Harun al-Rashid is celebrated in literature like the Arabian Nights as a glorious king, but for the Shia, he was a ruthless persecutor. He is reported to have had hundreds of Alids hunted down, buried alive, or executed.
Just brutal.
He perceived Musa al-Kazim's widespread moral influence as a direct threat. So Musa was arrested in Medina, dragged in heavy chains all the way to Iraq, and thrown into a dark dungeon.
Did he ever get out?
He was briefly released, then abruptly arrested again, kept in solitary confinement for years in Baghdad, and eventually, the sources state, murdered by poisoning in his cell by the caliph's agents.
The state mechanism is just grinding them down. But then we get to the eighth Imam, Ali Arida, and his story is completely different. It's almost surreal. It reads like a bizarre political thriller.
It is arguably the strangest episode in the entire history of the Imamate. After Harun al-Rashid dies, the vast Abbasid Empire is ripped apart by a brutal civil war between his two sons. The ultimate victor is the Caliph Ma'mun.
Okay, so Ma'mun wins.
Ma'mun is sitting in his capital in Marv, far out in the eastern province of Khorasan. Suddenly, out of nowhere, he summons the eighth Imam, Ali Arida, all the way from Medina to Marv, and there, in a move that shocked the entire world, Ma'mun publicly appoints the Shia Imam, Ali Arida, as his official heir apparent.
Wait, let me make sure I'm hearing this right. The Sunni Abbasid Caliph, whose family has spent decades torturing and murdering Shia Imams, suddenly makes the current Shia Imam the next in line to rule the entire empire.
Yes, and he goes even further. Ma'mun orders that the official black standards and uniforms of the Abbasid Empire, the very symbols of their dynasty, be stripped away and replaced with the green color of the Alid family. He puts Arida's name on the coinage.
Why on earth would he do that? It sounds like political suicide. What was the strategy?
It remains one of the most hotly debated actions in Islamic history. Conjecture abounds. Some historians argue it was a desperate, calculated move to placate the massive, serious Shi'i revolts that were currently tearing apart the western half of the empire. By making the Imam his heir, he neutralized the rebellions.
Oh, that makes sense.
Others suggest it was the heavy influence of Ma'mun's incredibly powerful Persian vizier who had strong, secret Shi'i leanings. Some even argue Ma'mun, who was intellectually curious, genuinely believed Arida was the most qualified man in the empire.
But I can only imagine the absolute whiplash this caused for the Abbasid establishment back in Baghdad. They must have been losing their minds.
They absolutely panicked. The powerful Abbasid family members and generals in Iraq viewed this as a catastrophic betrayal. They immediately rebelled, declared Ma'mun deposed, and set up a rival caliph in Baghdad.
So Mamun's plan backfires.
Massively, Mamun suddenly realizes he has overplayed his hand. He is about to lose the core of his empire. So he sets out for Iraq with his army, accompanied by the Imam, Ali Arida.
And what happens on the journey?
And miraculously, highly conveniently, on the journey back to Iraq, Ali Arida suddenly takes sick and dies after eating some grapes.
I don't think you need to be a conspiracy theorist to see where the Shi'i historians land on this one.
Unsurprisingly, traditional sources vehemently accuse Mamun of poisoning the Imam. They argue Mamun realized the Imam had become a political liability and assassinated him to win back the loyalty of Baghdad.
Very convenient timing.
Though, to be fair, Arida had plenty of furious Abbasid enemies who also had the motive and means to poison him. Regardless of who administered the poison, the suddenness of his death perfectly solved Mamun's massive political crisis. The official color was immediately changed back from Ullid green to Abbasid black, and the brief, bizarre dream of a unified Shi'i-Sunni empire vanished.
Which brings us to the ninth Imam, Muhammad Attaqi. And here the community hits a massive, unprecedented theological crisis. Because when his father is poisoned in Marv, the new Imam is in Medina, and he is only 7 years old.
This sent shockwaves through the community. The sources frankly admit that this caused a massive crisis of faith among many Shia.
I can imagine.
They had spent decades building up this rigorous theology under Jafar as-Sadiq, asserting that the Imam possesses profound, exhaustive, divine knowledge ilm, enabling him to flawlessly guide the community in all legal and spiritual matters.
Right. How do you logically reconcile that towering theological requirement with a 7-year-old child, a kid who hasn't even hit puberty?
It was a brutal test of their theological framework. The Shi'i scholars countered the doubt aggressively. They circulated numerous accounts and traditions demonstrating the boy's extraordinary, miraculous wisdom and ability to answer complex legal questions despite his age.
But what was their main argument?
Their strongest, most undeniable argument was scriptural. They pointed directly to the Quran, which explicitly states that both John the Baptist and Jesus were given their prophetic wisdom and missions while they were still young children, or even in the cradle.
They used the Jesus defense. They basically argue God is omnipotent. If God can make a baby Jesus speak from the cradle with the wisdom of a prophet, it is child's play for him to grant divine knowledge to a 7-year-old boy.
Exactly. Theological consistency was maintained through divine exception. Politically, the Caliph Mamun, still trying to maintain a facade of a friendly attitude toward the Shia, brings the young boy to Baghdad and actually marries the boy to his own daughter, al-Fadl.
Keep your enemies close.
He keeps his enemy close, integrated into the royal household. But eventually, under the reign of the subsequent caliph, the ninth Imam is also poisoned at the age of 25, allegedly by that very same Abbasid wife at the instigation of the state.
The paranoia of the state is just endless. Which brings us to the final chapters of the visible Imam, the 10th Imam, Ali al-Hadi, and the 11th Imam, Hasan al-Askari. And their lives are, frankly, incredibly grim. The state drops any pretense of respect and moves to outright containment.
The Abbasid Caliph Mutawakkil comes to power, and he is fiercely, aggressively anti-Shi'i. He institutes brutal, open persecution. He even destroys the shrine of Husayn at Karbala and bans pilgrimage to it.
He goes after the holy sites.
Mutawakkil forcibly summons the 10th Imam from Medina to the new Abbasid capital, Samarra. Now, Samarra wasn't a normal city. It was built essentially as a massive, sprawling military garrison to house the caliph's volatile Turkish mercenary armies.
It's just a giant army base.
Yes. The specific quarter where the Imam was forced to live was literally known as al-Askar, meaning the army camp.
Hence the title given to both the 10th and 11th Imams, the Askariyan, the two from the military camp.
Right. They were given a house, but it was a gilded cage. In reality, they were high-value prisoners of the caliph. The 10th Imam lived under suffocating house arrest, surrounded constantly by spies, guards, and informants for 20 years.
And his son, too.
When he eventually died again, poisoned his son, the 11th Imam, Hasan al-Askari, inherited that exact same captivity. He was born into it, and he died in it.
I really want you, the listener, to stop and put yourself in the shoes of a devout follower living in Kufa or Qom during this time. Think about the staggering cognitive dissonance you are forced to process. You genuinely, deeply believe that this man, the Imam, is the spiritual axis of the entire world. You believe he is divinely chosen by God to guide the entire human race. He is the ultimate authority on earth. But physical reality is screaming the exact opposite at you. Your divine cosmic leader effectively has a government ankle monitor on. He can't leave his house in a dusty military garrison in Samara. He is entirely cut off from his followers. If you want to ask him a question about how to pray or how to divide an inheritance, you can't go see him.
No, you have to use the underground network.
Right. You have to find a secret agent who smuggles a letter inside a hollowed-out piece of wood past the Turkish guards, hoping it doesn't get intercepted and result in your execution. How does a community sustain its faith under those crushing, humiliating conditions for decades?
They sustained it precisely through the survival mechanisms Jafar as-Sadiq had built a century earlier, through the rigorous practice of taqiyya secrecy, through deeply internalized loyalty that didn't require physical proximity, and through a highly sophisticated clandestine network of underground agents called the Wukala, who collected taxes and answered questions on the Imam's behalf.
They adapted.
They learned to operate entirely in the shadows, but the pressure was immense and the breaking point was fast approaching. The 11th Imam's tenure was brief, only about 6 years, and the access to him was so restricted, the surveillance so tight, that when he suddenly died in the year 260 AH, around 874 AD, the entire Shia community was utterly, catastrophically shattered.
Because it looked like he didn't have an heir. He died in a military prison and there was no visible son to take over. The unbroken lineage, the absolute core of their theology, hits a massive brick wall. And this triggers the final chaotic act of our deep dive, Section 5, the splintering.
The death of Hasan al-Askari threw the Shia world into absolute unprecedented confusion. The historical sources note with astonishment that the community fragmented into 14 or 15 entirely different sects almost overnight.
Why the sudden explosion of sects? Because their entire theological worldview demanded that the earth could never, even for a single second, be without a living imam. To be without an imam was to be disconnected from God. But physically, staring them in the face, there was no adult son to take over. It was an impossible paradox.
Exactly. The theological framework demanded a continuation, but empirical reality offered a void. The main body of believers, the group that would eventually solidify into Twelver Shi'ism, resolved this paradox through faith.
What did they believe?
They believed that Hasan al-Askari did in fact have a son, a young boy named Muhammad, who had been born in extreme secrecy and kept entirely hidden from the Abbasid authorities to protect his life. They believed that upon his father's death, this young boy performed the funeral prayers and immediately went into occultation gaiba.
He disappeared.
He became the 12th Imam, the Mahdi, the awaited one. They believe he is miraculously kept alive by God, remaining concealed from the eyes of the world, guiding the community in secret until the end of days when God will permit him to return, draw the sword, and fill the earth with absolute justice.
But naturally, in the chaos of 874 AD, not everyone bought that explanation. The pressure cooker of 2 centuries of basic persecution, combined with this sudden terrifying lack of a visible leader, caused the theology to just mutate and fracture in wildly different directions.
The texts categorize these early, chaotic divisions very helpfully. When studying these myriad sects, you encounter specific terminologies to classify their reactions. For instance, you have the Waqifiyya.
Meaning those who hesitate or those who stop.
Right. A Waqifiyya group is a sect that, when an imam dies, simply denies the reality of his death. They claim he hasn't died, he has merely gone into concealment and will return. They stop at that imam and refuse to recognize any subsequent successors.
We've seen that before.
We saw this earlier with some followers of the 7th Imam, Musa, who couldn't accept that he died in prison, so they formed a sect waiting for his return. In contrast to the Waqifiyya, you have the Qatiyya.
Those who are certain.
Yes. The Qatiyya are those who are certain of the physical death of a particular imam and logically move on to follow the next designated successor. Orthodox Twelvers are considered Qatiyya regarding the deaths of the first 11 imams, accepting their passing before affirming the occultation of the 12th.
But then you have the Gulat, the extremists. And if the Twelver path is a steady, slow-moving underground river waiting patiently to surface, the Gulat sects are like theological fireworks going off in every conceivable direction. They're fascinating, bizarre, and wild.
The Gulat stepped entirely outside the boundaries of Orthodox Islamic monotheism. They couldn't handle the physical defeat of the imams, so they elevated them to unimaginable heights.
Like giving them divine status.
Exactly. They held opinions like attributing literal divinity to the imams, a concept called anthropomorphism, the idea that the divine essence of God actually descended and took physical residence inside the body of the imam. They also introduced radical foreign doctrines like Tanasuk, the transmigration of souls or reincarnation, believing the divine spark passed from one body to the next.
Let's talk about some of these specific factions because they illustrate how far the human mind will stretch to rationalize trauma. The Saba'iyya.
The Saba'iyya are considered some of the earliest gulat. They trace their origins back to a semi-legendary figure named Ibn Saba, who operated all the way back during the caliphate of the first Imam, Ali. He allegedly walked up to Ali and declared, "Thou art God."
And Ali, being a fiercely strict Orthodox Muslim, was supposedly horrified, banished him, and according to some traditions, even had some of these extremists burned alive for heresy.
Yes. But after Ali was assassinated, Ibn Saba simply refused to accept it. He claimed Ali had not died, but that a devil had taken his appearance to be killed. He claimed the real Ali was alive, dwelling in the clouds.
Oh, and the clouds.
Yes. He taught that the thunder was actually Ali's voice, and the lightning was his whip, and that he would eventually descend from the clouds to fill the earth with justice. This is the very first primitive instance of the doctrines of occultation and messianic return, wrapped in mythological clothing.
Then you have the Kaisaniya.
The Kaysaniya were the remnants of Mukhtar's rebellion, the ones who supported Ibn al-Hanafiya. What makes them crucial to the history of theology is that they introduced and popularized the doctrine of Bada.
Bada meaning the changeability of God's will. Explain how that works.
When Mukhtar launched his rebellion, he confidently prophesied that God had promised them total victory. But then his army was crushed, and he was killed. To explain this catastrophic failure of prophecy without admitting Mukhtar was a liar, his followers developed the concept of Bada.
They changed the rules.
They argued that God's will is not static. It can change based on new circumstances or human actions. God had decreed victory, but then he altered his decree. It was a massive theological innovation born entirely out of the necessity of explaining political failure.
It's a way to cope.
And the Kaysaniya also held that Ibn al-Hanafiya didn't die but was concealed on Mount Radwa, guarded by magical lions and panthers, drinking from springs of milk and honey, waiting to return. They were so devoted to his peaceful return that some factions even fought their battles using only wooden sticks instead of iron swords, believing that drawing lethal weapons was strictly forbidden until the Mahdi returned to lead them.
It's just incredible. And that brings us to the Ismailiyya. We mentioned them earlier, the massive faction that split off after the sixth Imam, Jafar as-Sadiq. From a strictly historical perspective, they're arguably the most successful, most globally impactful of all the splinter groups.
Absolutely. The Ismailis took the concept of secrecy and esoteric knowledge to its absolute zenith. They developed a deeply complex theology based on dualism. They believe that everything in religion has a literal, external, obvious meaning, the zahir, which is for the common masses. But beneath that, there is a hidden, esoteric, profound meaning, the batin, which is known only to the Imam and the initiated elite.
A secret religion within the religion.
This intense focus on hidden knowledge made them incredibly potent. They organized highly disciplined, multi-tiered secret societies spanning across the Islamic world.
And unlike the Twelvers who waited for a hidden Mahdi, the Ismailis actively seized immense political power.
They did. Their clandestine networks eventually overthrew established powers and founded the vast Fatimid Caliphate in Egypt, which ruled a massive empire and founded the city of Cairo. And even within the Ismailis, the splintering continued.
Like the assassins, right?
The Nizari branch, for example, broke away and became famous in Western history as the Assassins. Operating out of the impregnable mountain fortress of Alamut in Iran, they utilized a terrifyingly effective strategy of asymmetrical warfare, conducting highly targeted suicidal assassinations of kings, generals, and viziers across the Middle East for centuries until the Mongol invasions finally destroyed their strongholds.
So, sitting back and looking at this sprawling, chaotic family tree of sects, I have to ask a sociological question. Why does extreme, relentless political persecution so consistently breed this kind of extreme esoteric theology? You have people believing in the transmigration of souls, believing that God is living in thunderclouds, believing that every word of Scripture has a secret, magical code. Why does the human mind go there when it's under pressure?
Because when your physical reality is one of constant defeat, humiliation, imprisonment, and execution at the hands of an overwhelming Orthodox majority state, you are forced to look beyond the physical to find meaning.
Reality is just too painful.
Exactly. If the external world, as I hear, is visibly corrupt, lethal to your community, and ruled by tyrants, then true justice and divine reality must reside in the hidden internal world, the Batan. The more the Abbasid authorities physically cracked down on the fragile human bodies of the Imams, poisoning them and locking them in basements, the more the traumatized followers reacted by elevating the Imams into cosmic, divine, untouchable figures.
It's a defense mechanism.
It is a profound psychological defense mechanism as much as it is a theological evolution. If the Imam is God, then the callous prison can't actually hold him.
And out of all this incredible chaos, out of this fragmentation into dozens of bizarre sects, and out of centuries of brutal systemic persecution, it was the 12 or Shia, the pragmatic Qatiyya, who soberly followed the line of designation down to the 11th Imam and then embraced the occultation of the 12th, who managed to solidify their doctrines and survive.
They did.
They formalized their jurisprudence, relied on the invisible spiritual presence of the hidden Mahdi for hope, and endured to become the predominant massive form of Shi'ism we see in the world today.
It is a truly remarkable testament to the endurance of a well-constructed idea. The intellectual architecture, formulated by Jafar as-Sadiq, the doctrine of Nas to ensure undeniable legitimacy, the doctrine of Ilm to provide unassailable spiritual authority, and the practice of taqiyya to ensure physical survival in a hostile world acted as the reinforced hull of a ship.
It kept them afloat.
It allowed the core community to navigate through the most violent storms of the Umayyad and Abbasid periods, survive the shattering crisis of the occultation, and sail into the modern era.
Which brings us to the end of this incredible journey, to synthesize everything we've unpacked for you today. We started on the chaotic battlefields with Ali, a man whose rigid, uncompromising adherence to principle ultimately cost him his empire and his life.
We witnessed the sheer, painful pragmatism of his son, Husayn, who willingly traded divine right for the physical lives of his vulnerable followers.
We then explored the earth-shattering, paradigm-shifting trauma of Karbala, where Husayn knowingly and brilliantly chose total annihilation to permanently jolt the moral consciousness of Islam, establishing an internal ethos of martyrdom.
From the ashes of Karbala, we watched the middle Imams execute a brilliant, quiet pivot. They retreated from the bloody sword to the scholar's mat, building a rigorous theological fortress of secret knowledge and dissimulation to keep their people alive.
Only to see the later Imams reduced to tragic political pawns, trapped under claustrophobic house arrest by terrified caliphs, which ultimately led to a massive theological explosion of radical sects when the visible physical line of Imams appeared to end in a military prison in Samarra.
It's an incredible arc.
Why does all of this ancient history matter to you today? Because this story is an absolute masterclass in the mechanics of resilience. It is a blueprint of how a marginalized group preserves its core identity against overwhelming, lethal state power, whether it's through a tragic, highly publicized sacrifice that inspires generations of weeping and moral clarity, or through the quiet, terrifying encoding of beliefs and the practice of strict secrecy to survive brutal regimes. The multi-generational saga of the Imams is a testament to the indestructible nature of human belief.
It proves that ultimate power is not only wielded from a gilded throne or the tip of a spear. Sometimes the most enduring, unshakable power comes from the willingness to suffer, the patience to wait, and the absolute determination to keep a small flame alive in the suffocating dark.
And that leads me to one final provocative thought I want to leave you with today. Something for you to mull over on your own that builds on everything we've discussed, but flips it on its head. We spent a lot of time talking about taqiyya, the permissible, necessary hiding of one's faith to survive, right? We talked about the heavy psychological toll of living a double life. But consider this. If an entire community is forced to practice dissimulation, actively hiding their deepest, truest beliefs from the hostile outside world for generations, at what point does the secret itself become the most sacred part of the religion? Does being forced into the shadows, guarding a hidden truth with your very life, actually make a belief system stronger, more potent, and more fiercely loved than if it had just safely ruled in the daylight?
That is a profoundly challenging question about the inherent nature of faith, adversity, and secrecy.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the shadows of history. Until next time.